Jack Reacher gets off a Greyhound bus in a small town called Margrave. He only has some cash and a few basic things with him. He walks into a local diner. Before he even sits down, he sees a man mistreating his girlfriend. Without saying a word, he scares the man off. Then he heads inside the diner and orders some peach pie. Just as he is about to take his first bite, he notices police cars pulling up outside. He slowly puts his fork down. The police storm into the diner and arrest him for murder. They roughly pull him out, tying his hands with zip ties, and take him to the police station. At the station, Roscoe Conklin processes him. She notices that he is completely silent. The only things he has on him are a passport with the name Jack Reacher, no middle name, a small amount of cash, and an old French medal from World War II. His silence irritates the officers, especially Chief Morrison. The chief threatens to throw him into a holding cell until he talks. Before that can happen, Oscar Finley steps in. He orders the officers to put Reacher in a conference room instead. He introduces himself as the detective in charge. He tells Reacher that he has been arrested for a murder that happened earlier that morning. The crime was brutal, but carried out with skill. The victim's fingers were swollen, making it impossible to identify him. Finley assumes that a lawyer might make Reacher talk, but Reacher finally breaks his silence to refuse a lawyer. He firmly states that he has not killed anyone, at least not recently, and not in this town. Finley doubts him. He believes Reacher is capable of such a crime because of his military background, but Reacher proves him wrong. He explains that the way the murder was carried out suggests there were 3 killers, each with a different style. This was not the work of a single person. Finley still does not trust him. A witness saw a man who looked like Reacher walking near the crime scene. Reacher admits that was him. He had asked the bus driver to drop him off at the town's border. He had come to Margrave because of Blind Blake, a blues musician rumored to have died there. Finlay is not convinced. He locks Reacher in a holding cell until he can check his alibi. While sitting in the cell, Reacher remembers his childhood. In 1998, his family moved to an army base. He and his older brother Joe walked to the beach. They ran into some other kids from the base. One of them shoved Reacher. Without hesitation, he and Joe took off their jackets, ready for a fight. Joe muttered that their mother was right. Trouble always found him. Later, Roscoe brings Reacher a cup of coffee. He asks her to remove the zip ties, but she refuses. Chief Morrison has not given permission. They talk for a little while. She eventually admits that he does not seem guilty of anything serious. His preliminary background check came up clean. Before leaving with Finley, she takes his coffee away. Finley and Roscoe follow their only lead, a phone number stuck to the bottom of the victim's shoe. It belongs to a local finance guy named Paul Hubble. When they track him down and tell him about the murder, Hubble immediately confesses. Roscoe gets ready to record him giving up his rights, but he doesn't even need to hear them. He just confesses again, saying he killed the man. Finley isn't buying it. The more he pushes, the more obvious it becomes. Hubble is lying. He's too nervous, too eager to take the blame. They arrest him anyway and bring him back to the station. Hubble gets locked up in the same cell as Reacher. Finley asks Reacher to come with him, but Reacher refuses until they take the zip ties off. Finlay keeps pushing, and Reacher finally gives in. With no effort at all, he snaps the ties apart like they're nothing, then picks up the broken pieces off the floor. Roscoe and Finley just stare, clearly surprised. Now that Hubble has confessed, Reacher is ready to walk away, but Finley isn't so sure he should be off the hook yet. They stand in the parking lot, going back and forth about Hubble's confession. It's a lie, and they both know it. Finley still thinks Hubble is hiding something, but Reacher is more interested in Stevenson, the officer who kept locking eyes with Hubble at the station. Finley points out that Hubble is married to Stevenson's cousin, but Reacher thinks there's more to it than just family ties. Finley calls Reacher cocky, so Reacher decides to prove a point. In just a few seconds, he perfectly sizes Finley up. He went to Harvard. He's divorced. He recently quit smoking. Finley doesn't say anything at first, but then admits Reacher is right. He really did go to Harvard. He's around 40, and his tweed suit still smells faintly of cigarettes. With no argument left, Finley tells Reacher to follow him inside. Inside Finley's office, they question Stevenson. Reacher quickly runs through the 3 main motives for murder, trying to see if any of them fit. Stevenson confirms that Hubble was with family past midnight, so he couldn't have done it. Finley dismisses him, but now he's got another problem. Why would a guy like Hubble confess to a murder he didn't commit? He figures the only way to get the truth is to have Reacher talk to him in prison. Before they're taken away, Reacher tells the officers to make sure they log everything Hubble has on him. Then he turns to Roscoe and tells her it was nice talking with her. Soon after, he and Hubble are transported to the local prison. Officer Spivey handles their intake and tries to force a strip search. Reacher immediately refuses, knowing it's illegal. Spivey tries to argue, but Reacher isn't budging. After a few sarcastic remarks, Spivey gives up and takes them to their cell. Once inside, Hubble won't stop talking. Reacher tells him to shut up. The next morning, Finley sits at his desk, watching his wedding ring spin on the surface. After a moment, he picks up his phone and calls Sharon. He tells her he misses her and that he's stuck in a small town in Georgia working on a tough case. When the call ends, Roscoe walks in with Reacher's military file. She starts reading out his stats, and with every detail, Finley gets more and more impressed, even though he pretends not to care. Reacher solved over 100 cases in the military police, and every single one led to a conviction. His medal count is long and full of big names. Finley keeps wondering why a guy like Reacher is even in Margrave, but Roscoe is thinking about something else, why he's locked up in jail. If she were the one who put him there, she'd be worried. Finley tells her to get out of his office, and she listens. Meanwhile, in prison, Reacher realizes right away that they've been thrown into general population with the lifers. He turns to Hubble and warns him that in a place like this, he's just currency, someone people will use or trade. Hubble should save his strength. Then Reacher leans back on the bed like he doesn't have a single worry in the world. It doesn't take long before trouble finds them. A group of inmates walks in. One of them takes Hubble's shoes, then his glasses, and then crushes them under his foot. The same guy starts making threats, clearly expecting no resistance. But before anything worse can happen, Reacher steps in. He gives them until the count of 3 to walk away. They don't. So, Reacher headbutts the leader, knocking him out cold. His friends hesitate, but that doesn't stop Reacher. He takes a pair of glasses from one of them, then kicks the rest out of the cell. Without a care, he puts the glasses on, then heads for the prison yard with Hubble following behind. Reacher and Hubble sit on the benches in the prison yard. Reacher assures Hubble that he'll be safe, but Hubble is terrified. He explains that some dangerous people forced him to help with their shady business. If he messes up their operation, they'll torture him in front of his family before killing him and his wife. Later, they head to the bathroom when a group of inmates enters, forcing the other prisoners out. Reacher tells them to walk away, but they ignore him. A fight breaks out, and Reacher takes them down one by one. The security team is alerted, and while Reacher is briefly overwhelmed by the attackers, he regains control and finishes them off just as the guards arrive. One of the officers questions why Reacher and Hubble were even in general population. The guards escort them back upstairs and place them in a private room. Officially, that's where they've been the whole time. Reacher wakes up to the sound of soft music playing on the radio. Hubble put it on, hoping for something calming. Reacher notices food trays, and Hubble lets him have both. Hubble worries he'll be killed once he's bailed out, but Reacher thinks he'll be fine since he's too important to their operation. What bothers Reacher is why someone wants him dead. Spivey set them up, throwing them into Gen Pop, and the inmates were paid to kill them during the bathroom fight. Reacher plans to leave Margrave as soon as he's released. That afternoon, Reacher and Hubble are finally let out. Roscoe is waiting for him, offering a ride and returning his belongings. She also shows him Greyhound footage of him getting on the bus last night. She admits she had to lie to get the footage, but it was the only way to get him out while they press charges on Hubble to see if he breaks. Reacher approves of the plan and calls her Officer Roscoe. She corrects him. Roscoe is her first name. Conklin is her last. She asks if he's hurt, and he mentions a scrape, but insists he's fine. He plans to leave town, and she feels bad that his welcome to Margrave has been a disaster. She was going to make it up to him with an early dinner, which he immediately agrees to. First, though, he needs new clothes, so they stop at a thrift store. As they drive, she asks about his life. He explains that he wants to see the country on his own terms, without settling down anywhere. His pension gets wired to a bank every month, so he doesn't need a home base. The only family he has left is his brother Joe, but he doesn't know where he is. Inside the store, Roscoe presses him on why he came to Margrave. Reacher tells the truth. He's here because of Blind Blake. A while ago, he was in a Tampa bar where Police Dog Blues was playing, and it reminded him of a conversation he had with Joe about Blind Blake. Then he read an article saying Blind Blake performed his last show in Margrave, so he decided to visit. Roscoe drops him off in town, and as he walks through, people avoid him like he's bad news. He stops at a statue dedicated to Casper Teal, then heads to a barbershop for a shave. Inside, he talks to Mr. Mosley and asks about Blind Blake. They bond over their love of blues music. Mosley already knows who Reacher is. The whole town is talking, but he isn't afraid of him since Roscoe cleared his name. He tells Reacher about Blind Blake and the Kleiner Foundation's influence over the town. Just then, a truck pulls up outside. KJ Kleiner and his cousin Dawson step out, watching Reacher. He leaves the shop and confronts KJ for staring. KJ smirks, saying he's read Reacher's file. Specifically, the charges against him from Baghdad that mysteriously disappeared. He warns Reacher that Margrave doesn't forget things so easily. Reacher heads to the police station and learns that another body has been found. Roscoe cancels dinner, which disappoints him. She's also unsure if he can leave town yet. Before he can respond, Finley storms over, accusing him of talking to Hubble in lockup. Reacher denies it, but Finley doesn't believe him. Not that Reacher cares. Finley threatens to throw him back in jail until a forensic scientist finishes reviewing his alibi footage. Or he can come to the morgue with them in case something jogs his memory about Hubble. At the morgue, the medical examiner, Jasper, goes over the details of the crime. The first John Doe is tough to identify because his dental work is a mix. Some done in the US, some done overseas. His fingerprints are ruined by a dermatitis reaction. Reacher glances at the monitor displaying the victim's hand. He immediately picks up on something. The victim was allergic to latex, so the killers must have worn polyvinyl gloves. The mixed dental work suggests he got treatment wherever he was living at the time. Then Reacher notices something else. The victim had a broken right arm set in Berlin when he was 8. His tonsils were removed in Seoul when he was 10. Jasper pulls the body from storage and reveals the face. Reacher stares in shock. He picks up the man's hand and sees a scar on the left wrist. His mind flashes back. When they were kids, he wrestled with his brother and accidentally pinned him against a hot stove. That's how his brother got the scar. Reacher silently leaves the morgue, but Finley won't stop throwing accusations at him. Tension boils over until Roscoe steps in to defuse the situation. She tells Reacher to get in the back of the car. She knows he won't hurt Finley unless he has a reason, but right now, Finley is giving him a reason. She trusts he won't act on it. Reacher gets in the car without another word. As they drive, his mind races. He wonders if Joe told him about Blind Blake for a reason, as a clue, a way to lead him here. Maybe Joe needed him to do something about what was happening in Margrave. Finley asks what he plans to do. Reacher doesn't hesitate. He's going to find everyone responsible, and he's going to kill them. Back at the precinct, Reacher storms off. Finley tells Roscoe to make sure Reacher doesn't mess up their case. Reacher listened to her at the morgue, and if he doesn't now, Finley says she should shoot him. Roscoe follows Reacher in a squad car. He quickly notices her tailing him. He tells her not to mess with his investigation, but she isn't keen on babysitting him either. She wants to do her job, and she's good at it. Reacher mocks her poor tailing skills, but she already knows he's going to Hubble's to question the man. She can keep following him, or he can let her get in. He decides to save the walk and lets her join him. At the Hubble house, Charlie greets them. She thanks Reacher for protecting her husband in prison. She doesn't know where Paul is, but Reacher tells her that Paul's body was the one found by the highway. Joe had Paul's number on him. Charlie is confused about why that would be. Tally and Lucy come in, and Charlie sends them upstairs to bed. She says Tally wears glasses, but is younger than Lucy. Reacher asks to use the bathroom, but as he walks through the house, he starts snooping. He finds Paul's shoes and notices a familiar seed on one. He tells Roscoe he's leaving. Outside, Reacher figures out that the only difference between the girls is the glasses. Everything else is different. He thinks the cons who attacked him meant to take out the one with glasses. He had sunglasses because he took them from a fellow inmate. Reacher suspects Hubble is either on the run or already caught. He shows Roscoe the seed he found on the shoe, and she identifies it as a hitchhiker seed. It could have grown where Joe's body was found. They go to investigate the spot, but there are no burrs. Reacher still thinks it matters. He believes Joe's shooter was a skilled marksman. He breaks down the details of the killing and crime scene. He can tell the shooter enjoyed the kill. Roscoe asks about Joe. She wonders if they were close or had family. She asks what Joe did for work. Reacher says they were close when they were young. Joe had no family and worked with Homeland Security the last time they spoke. He doesn't know which department, since they hadn't talked in a while. Reacher suddenly walks off to find a motel and turns down Roscoe's offer for a ride. Roscoe follows him to the motel. He comes out of the office and a group of young men starts to harass him. Reacher knows they've been waiting for him. Kleiner paid them to deal with him. Reacher isn't interested in dealing with them, but one of the boys, Graham, throws a can at his back and threatens to beat him up. The fight starts, with Reacher breaking their hands, leaving one kid to drive. From her lookout, Roscoe wonders what's going on in Margrave. In the morning, Reacher takes a walk and notices a dog with an empty water bowl. He hops over the fence and fills the bowl with water from the hose. The owner comes out, claiming he gave the dog water earlier, but Reacher calls him a liar. The owner tells him to leave, so Reacher pets the dog and leaves. He heads to the station, but when he gets there, Roscoe can't talk because Chief Morrison was killed. Reacher says he didn't do it, and Roscoe knows he didn't. He gets in the car with her. When they get to the crime scene, Finley is already there. It's worse than anything Reacher saw in Boston. Reacher realizes Morrison was nailed to a wall. Inside, the crime scene matches exactly what Hubble told him about in prison. Jasper, the coroner, is giving his report when they arrive. Reacher figures it took 4 men to kill Morrison, and his testicles were found in his stomach. Finley pulls him outside, and Reacher explains Hubble's warning. He lied earlier because he didn't know if he could trust the Margrave cops. Finley suggests Joe might have been dirty, but Reacher disagrees. He does think the Margrave PD is dirty, though. He remembers how Baker didn't worry about him escaping at the station because he knew Reacher was innocent. Reacher knows Roscoe isn't dirty, but wonders about Finley since he's next in line for Morrison's job. Roscoe steps in, saying that Mayor Teal made himself acting chief, meaning Teal is dirty and Finley is fine. Morrison's death was a message, and Roscoe and Finley can't handle it alone. The three of them need to work together. Reacher thinks Hubble is already dead. Reacher and Roscoe head to Hubble's house, where Charlie says Paul never came home. Roscoe decides to stay there since she's armed, but sends Reacher to talk to Finley. Reacher needs Hubble's car. He takes a knife from the garage lockbox and tells Roscoe to shoot anyone over 6'5" who comes near the house. She won't give him a gun. Reacher goes to the town meeting where Teal is giving a speech about making himself chief of police. The townspeople jeer at both Teal and Finley. Teal denies that the murders are connected. Mr. Kleiner steps in, vouching for Reacher's innocence and saying his brother was one of the victims. He talks about how Margrave was a mess 5 years ago and how he helped turn it around. He promises to fix things. KJ and his cousin give Reacher a glare from across the room. After the meeting, Finley talks to Teal about connecting the killings. Teal refuses, saying they're not linked. He sends Finley to search through the archives of Morrison's recent convictions, because the killer is likely one of those people. Teal also refuses to let the highway murders take priority over Morrison's death. Finley tells Reacher that Teal sent him off on a wild goose chase. Reacher thinks Kleiner is dirty and worth checking out, but Finley warns that looking into him could make the town hate Reacher even more, and then he'd be stuck digging through the archives. Reacher wants them to pretend to look into those cases while they actually focus on the real work, like checking out Joe's rental car. They also need to protect Hubble's family. Finley decides to call his FBI buddy Picard from Atlanta to watch over them since he trusts him. He also tells Reacher to get a phone. After Finley leaves, Teal approaches Reacher to offer his condolences for Joe's death. He promises to find the killer and says he'll keep Reacher updated before leaving town. Reacher makes it clear that he's staying in Margrave, which doesn't sit well with Teal. Reacher buys a phone at a store next to Mosley's barbershop. Mosley expresses his sympathy about Joe but warns Reacher that some Spanish-speaking guys have been asking about him. Reacher wonders if Mosley is worried, but Mosley insists it's just about business. Reacher might need another shave soon. Charlie talks to Roscoe about how Reacher is a good person who can help them. Reacher comes back and tells Charlie to pack up because she's going into custody with FBI agent Picard. Charlie hesitates, but Reacher says this is what Hubble would want. He reluctantly admits Paul is probably dead, but Charlie has to look out for her kids now. Roscoe is shocked. Reacher leaves to wait for Picard and notices a children's bike outside. Reacher remembers being back in Okinawa, where a group of older boys is picking on a special needs kid, Billy. Reacher steps in and scares the bullies off. Billy's dad arrives, and the bullies run away. Back in the present, Reacher notices a black car pull up and watch him before driving off. He bursts in and tells everyone to leave, even though they're not ready. The door opens, and Reacher grabs Roscoe's gun. The man reveals he's Picard, and Reacher verifies his identity. He helps Charlie get the bags into the car. Picard tells Roscoe this operation is off the books, and he's taking personal days to watch the family. He doesn't want to get burned, and Roscoe promises she won't let that happen. After Picard leaves, Reacher sends Roscoe back to Finley and heads to find Spivey at Warburton. Whoever's paying Spivey is running everything. Reacher calls Spivey, pretending to be Finley, and sets up a meeting to get their stories straight about the prison incident. They meet in a bar parking lot late at night. Spivey isn't surprised that Reacher set him up, so he did the same. A car pulls up and a man with a gun stands in front of Reacher. The trunk opens and the man orders Reacher to get in, but Reacher refuses since it's too small. He knows the man will hesitate, and he uses that to his advantage to disarm the guys. Reacher ends up in a knife fight with one of the men, and the brawl gets worse with Reacher getting cut in the back. The police arrive, and Reacher runs off with an officer chasing him. Roscoe is at the Margrave PD looking into rental cars, but it's a dead end. Reacher shows up, covered in blood after things went wrong. Roscoe patches him up, though he refuses stitches. Finley is mad that the guys in the fight weren't caught since they can't question them now. Reacher jokes that he tried to sound like Finley but couldn't pull it off. Finley reviews what they know. The men in the fight were South American military. Roscoe found out Joe worked for the Secret Service, but that could mean anything. Reacher suspects it's related to counterfeiting since Hubble worked in bank management. Roscoe's waiting for a call from the Office of Investigations. Reacher wants to search Spivey's house, but there's no public info on the guard's address, so Finley sends him home. Reacher tries to go to a bar, but Finley shoots it down, saying the townspeople are already angry. Reacher leaves, and Finley puts Roscoe on Reacher duty again. In the parking lot, Roscoe offers to take him to a roadhouse out of town since she knows he needs a drink. She says it might even play the blues music he likes. She needs to change first, and Reacher needs a shirt without blood on it. They drive to the roadhouse, and Blind Blake is playing on the radio. They arrive, have some beers, and a Patsy Cline song comes on. It's the law to dance, but Reacher doesn't. His mom taught him to dance, but when he asks, it usually ends with a lot of punching. Roscoe teases him, calling him Frankenstein's monster, and they slow dance together. When they're ready to leave, it's raining. Reacher starts to take off his jacket for her, but she doesn't need it. She runs out into the rain and jumps in the car. As they drive, they pass a scene with police cars. Reacher pulls out a gun from the glove box, but Roscoe assures him they're far from Margrave. Reacher doesn't think that's far enough and tells her to duck when he says to. They stop and she shows her badge, learning that the bridge is flooded. She asks if there's a motel nearby. Reacher wrings out his shirt and Roscoe apologizes for not having anything his size in her truck. He gets food from the vending machine and goes to the Clark bar. He reminisces that every base he was at as a kid had Clark bars. He and Joe could always count on that. He offers her half, but she prefers Zagnut. He jokes that no one likes Zagnut and dares her to read the flavor on the chips she's eating. Spicy Cajun crawtators. That night, Reacher sleeps on the floor while Roscoe takes the bed. He's been in worse places, and she's never left Margrave. Her family's been there since the town was founded. The Conklins built the town, but the Teals got in with the railroads, stole the town, laid tracks, and swindled farmers out of their land. He asks about her family. Her parents died when she was a kid, but she had Gray, the former chief detective, as a second dad. He taught her how to be a cop, but he hung himself a year ago. He always gave her daisies on her birthday because they were her favorite. She asks about his family, and he says he only had Joe left. If it weren't for the Blind Blake song, it would have been years before he found out Joe was dead. Roscoe admits it's been nice getting to know him, even with the circumstances. He says he feels the same way. In the morning, they head to Roscoe's house and find the front door ajar. They investigate, weapons drawn, and find muddy footprints but nothing missing. The footprints are from rubber overshoes, which could belong to either of them. She closes the door and finds a message carved into the wood. "See you soon." Reacher says he's going to need a gun. After the home invasion, Reacher immediately wants to protect Roscoe, telling her it's normal to be scared. This frustrates her, and she snaps back, calling him a condescending jerk. She explains how she could have joined the FBI or CIA but chose not to because she can't stand the nonsense. She doesn't need him to look after her. She's not scared, just furious that someone broke into her home, the one she worked hard to fix up in a town her family built. She grabs a box from the shelf and opens it, revealing an impressive gun. She hands it over to Reacher, who test fires it, blowing a huge hole through a tree stump. Reacher, Roscoe, and Finley visit Jasper at the medical examiner's office to learn more about the second body found. The body is identified as Pete Jobling, a trucker with a clean record aside from a traffic violation and a disorderly conduct charge that a lawyer managed to erase. Roscoe gets a call from Molly Beth Gordon, a special administrative officer with the Secret Service who worked closely with Joe. She's shaken by the news of Joe's death, and Reacher tells her Joe had been heading up anti-counterfeiting operations. He'd been investigating something classified in Margrave, but Molly Beth promises to get Joe's files to them. Reacher insists she only bring the hard copies. Finley announces he's heading over to Spivey's house and asks Roscoe to go back to the police station to keep up the act that they're investigating Chief Morrison's murder. He tells Reacher to visit Kleiner Industries' attorneys to get more info on Jobling's past run-ins with the law. At Margrave PD, Roscoe keeps up the charade with Teal, telling him she's starting to look into the list of ex-cons he gave her. Stevenson asks if that's the best use of her time, and Roscoe stands her ground. He then shares his concerns about his cousin Charlie and Paul, who've been unreachable, and he's worried about what's happening in the town. Meanwhile, Finley sneaks into Spivey's house and checks his phone logs, finding several calls to Kleiner Industries. Before he can investigate further, he's ambushed by a uniformed officer who accuses him of robbing the town and gives him a beating. Reacher walks into Pete Jobling's attorney's office using the name Brian Doyle and pretending he was hit by a delivery truck from the Home Depot. But when he finally admits he's there for information on Pete Jobling, he doesn't waste time and uses violence to get the attorney to print out Jobling's file. Meanwhile, Finley is let out of a holding cell at Alton PD by a fired-up Roscoe. She's furious that two officers beat him up and jokingly asks when the last time was that they caught a burglar wearing a three-piece suit. Finley calms her down, saying that cursing shows a weak mind, but he appreciates her having his back. On the way to the car, he tells her that he did get some valuable information. The team regroups at Jolene's Chicken Shack. Reacher goes over Jobling's file and discovers that the Kleiners had covered Jobling's legal fees. Finley shares that Spivey has disappeared but had multiple calls on his phone made to Kleiner Industries. They decide to head to Kleiner Industries to confront Kleiner, while Roscoe continues searching for Joe's rental car. At Kleiner Industries, Kleiner denies knowing anything about Spivey or Jobling's situation. He urges Finley to stop investigating, but Finley stands firm, warning Kleiner that there will be serious consequences if he continues to interfere with the investigation. As they drive back from Kleiner Industries, Reacher reflects on Kleiner's bullying ways and remembers a time when he and Joe had dealt with a similar type of person. The team meets back at Finley's place and agrees that laying low is the best option for now. They decide to regroup later at a motel. Reacher plans to head to the Blue Cat Bar and Grill to ask about Spivey, while Roscoe decides to visit Mrs. Jobling. While at a local convenience store picking up some personal items, Roscoe runs into KJ Kleiner, who starts spreading rumors about Reacher, claiming he killed civilians in the war and had all the charges wiped clean thanks to his connections. Kleiner labels Reacher a murderer. Finley, under the guise of Steve Williams from the Charleston branch, attends a team-building event at Axis Financial, the company Hubble worked for. While there, Finley discovers that Hubble hasn't shown up for work in a year. At the Blue Cat Bar and Grill, Reacher doesn't get the answers he wants about Spivey and is asked to leave. Instead of backing down, Reacher punches a guy to the floor and demands to know where Spivey is. The guy spills that Spivey left in a rush with 2 Spanish-speaking men. As Reacher walks out, he notices a car tailing him, leading them into a field. He ambushes the car, killing both men. When he opens the trunk to hide their bodies, he finds Spivey already there, dead from a bullet to the head. Reacher dumps the 2 dead hitmen into the trunk of their car. Finley updates Reacher, saying Joe's rental car has been found. Roscoe then calls Reacher out about the stuff KJ told her. Reacher explains that while he was stationed near Baghdad, he killed 3 men who were sexually assaulting a group of young boys. He says it was a tough choice, but it was the right one. Afterward, Reacher and Roscoe take the hitmen's car to the airport and park it in a garage. That night, they check into a hotel in Atlanta. While Reacher is in the shower, Roscoe joins him, and things get heated. They end up sleeping together. The next day, Reacher and Roscoe head to the Jobling's house, but it turns out to be Pete's parents' house. They get the son's address and head over. When they arrive, they find a house with high-end furniture, which seems odd for a truck driver. Mrs. Jobling admits she had a feeling Pete was involved in something shady. They search the garage for any clues, but come up empty. Meanwhile, Teal gives Finley a lecture at the Margrave PD about staying out of Kleiner's business. Reacher and Roscoe meet with Picard, who gives them a lead on the motel where Joe stayed before he was killed. Reacher finds a hidden note with 3 phone numbers. Before they can act on it, more mercenaries ambush them, but Roscoe manages to save Reacher. They link up with Finlay, who calls the numbers. He also gets Neagley to look into one of the numbers. Later, Molly Beth arrives in Atlanta with Joe's files, but someone kills her and takes the files before Reacher can get to her. With the murder of Molly Beth Gordon still on their minds, Roscoe, Finley, and Reacher are determined to find out who did it. Back in Margrave, they drive past a house where they had previously seen a dog being mistreated. Finley stops the car, and both Reacher and Finley head into the yard to remove a collar that's cutting into the dog's neck. The owner shows up, yelling at them for being on his property, and Reacher punches him in the face, then puts the dog's collar on the man, asking him how it feels. The dog happily hops into the car, surprising Roscoe. Reacher asks for a ride to the Hubble's place because his car is full of bullet holes and he needs a new one. In Hubble's Bentley, Reacher drives back to the police station and sees someone spray-painted "whore" on the side of Roscoe's truck. Reacher quickly jumps back in the car, heads to confront KJ, who he believes is responsible. Roscoe and Finley go after Reacher to stop him from doing something he'd regret. Reacher finds KJ's truck parked outside a cafe and walks in to confront him. When KJ insults Roscoe, a fight breaks out, and Reacher easily takes KJ and his guys down. KJ jumps up with a knife just as Roscoe and Finlay arrive to stop things from getting worse. Mr. Kleiner shows up and demands Reacher be arrested for assault. Finlay asks Roscoe to take Reacher outside. Roscoe gets a call from Teal, where he tells her that he found out she hasn't been focusing on the right case, the one about the Morrisons' murder. He fires her for poor work. Roscoe doesn't back down and tells Finlay she's not handing in her gun. Finlay tells her he doesn't want her to either, given everything going on. Then Finlay mentions that the Kleiners aren't pressing charges against Reacher. Reacher starts to think that Gray might have left something behind. Gray gave Roscoe his Desert Eagle a year before he allegedly committed suicide, which doesn't add up. The team goes to Roscoe's to check the box the gun came in. Reacher finds a hidden compartment with a key. At first, they're unsure what it opens, but then Reacher remembers Roscoe mentioning that Gray went to the barbershop every week. When they get there, Mosley tells Roscoe that Gray told him not to give a big file cabinet to anyone except her, saying he was proud of his girl. The box holds detailed records of the Kleiners' financials, showing that they're distributing way more money than they bring in. The team figures out that the Kleiners are running a big counterfeiting operation, and the money they pay people in Margrave is to buy their loyalty. Reacher realizes Margrave is the perfect place to distribute counterfeit money. Finley points out that the Coast Guard blockade has kept the Kleiners from receiving their fake money, and the recent murders show that they're freaking out because they can't supply their customers. Roscoe suddenly realizes that Gray was also murdered and storms out of the barbershop with Finley following her. Reacher flashes back to his childhood when his mother made him and Joe get haircuts and wear their best clothes to visit General Bishop to apologize for beating up his son. Joe apologizes, but when Josephine pushes Reacher, he resists at first but eventually apologizes. Though his apology is that he's sorry both sides of the boy's face didn't get equally damaged. Reacher smirks as he walks away. The lesson he's learned? Bad people don't deserve apologies. He shares this with Roscoe and Finley. Reacher gets a weird call from Neagley, who says she wanted to have dinner at 10, but had it at 6 instead. Reacher figures out that 10-6 is military police code for send civilian police. Neagley couldn't say much over an unsecured line, but she knew Reacher would get it and realized she was teasing him for being a civilian. Reacher needs to go to Memphis, but Roscoe is confused about how he'll find her. Reacher tells them his plan, and when he gets to Memphis, he picks the exact diner where Neagley is. They head to a big public park to talk privately. Neagley tells Reacher that one of the names on Joe's list was an EPA agent who was murdered, supposedly during a robbery. But Neagley notices something strange. The report says he was killed with a silenced 9mm bullet, and nothing was taken during the robbery. So, the robbery story doesn't add up. Neagley tells Reacher that a Memphis cop had doubts about the EPA agent's murder, but backed off when the FBI took over. This cop agrees to meet Neagley and introduce her to one of his confidential informants to see if they have any useful info. She also reveals that after the EPA agent was killed, his body was savaged, and when Reacher mentions that the same thing happened to Joe, Neagley realizes how personal this is for him and warns him to be careful. Neagley adds that the EPA agent was investigating high pollution levels in the Mississippi River and that the last page of his report is missing. The area he was focused on is near Chester, Alabama. Reacher insists they need to go there. Meanwhile, Roscoe visits Jasper, the medical examiner, to look into Gray's death. She asks if it's possible that Gray's head injury wasn't from a fall, but from being struck. Jasper pulls up a photo showing a diamond-shaped pattern on the wound, which Roscoe takes as confirmation of her suspicion. She quickly leaves Jasper's office. Reacher and Neagley arrive in Chester and talk to a fisherman who tells them Clarin Chemicals was responsible for the pollution, but the EPA did nothing about it. Neagley looks up the company and finds out it was dissolved years ago and that it was owned by Kleiner Industries. After her visit to Jasper, Roscoe storms into the Margrave police station and punches Teal twice in the face. Finley and Baker have to restrain her. Finley drags Roscoe out to his car and scolds her for her actions, which make it clear to Teal that they know what's really going on in Margrave. Finley warns Roscoe that she can't stay in town, or Teal will have a warrant out for her arrest. He takes her to a motel, and while there, he gets a call from Picard, who says he can no longer watch over Charlie and her daughters. This works out because now Roscoe can stay with them while staying hidden. Neagley hears from her contact in the Memphis PD that the informant is ready to talk, so she and Reacher meet him at a strip club. They find out that the man who killed the EPA agent is known as the Viking. As they leave the club, they're in the back of a police car when the driver suddenly shoots and kills his partner. The driver tells Reacher and Neagley that he's been ordered by the Kleiner group to keep quiet, and that they're next. Reacher and Neagley kick the back of the driver's seat, causing him to lose control and crash the car into a river. They manage to escape from the sinking vehicle and leave the officer to drown. They find a clothing donation bin to change into dry clothes, and while Neagley heads back to Memphis to gather more info on the Viking, Reacher returns to Margrave to work with Finley. Finley breaks into the Kleiner Industries building, hoping to find financial documents that will expose the counterfeiting operation. When he enters Kleiner's office, he finds the man dead with his throat brutally slashed in a way known as the Venezuelan butterfly cut. After Kleiner's murder, Finley checks in with Teal at the police station where KJ confronts him. Teal orders Finley to back off, but that only makes Finley more determined to get to the bottom of what's going on. Picard takes Roscoe to a safe house to keep an eye on Charlie and the kids. Realizing that the Bentley he's driving is too recognizable, Reacher takes it to an auto shop for window tinting as a cover-up to get a loaner car that doesn't stand out as much. Reacher and Finley use the new vehicle to stake out Kleiner's warehouse, where they talk about Neagley and the 110th. Reacher stays tight-lipped about both topics. They see Dawson climb into one of Kleiner's box trucks and follow him to Tennessee, where Dawson stops at a motel. Reacher climbs onto the truck, cutting a hole in the sheet metal, only to discover the truck is empty. Confused, they call the two professors Joe was working with. They find out that Professor Bryant from Princeton has been killed. Reacher calls the other professor, Castillo, warns her to take precautions, and tells her he's heading to New York. At the safe house, Roscoe notices a light outside in the trees. She tells Charlie to get the girls ready to run, grabs a gun, and goes to check it out. She surprises two hitmen and yells for Charlie and the girls to run. They escape and head for the highway. Roscoe kills both men and meets up with Charlie and the girls, and they head to a diner to wait for Picard. At the diner, Charlie shares that her husband, Hubble, had been lured by Kleiner to travel to his facility in Venezuela, where he learned the truth about Kleiner's operations. To force Hubble's cooperation, Kleiner showed him just how brutal he could get. Picard arrives, and they leave with him. Finlay drops Reacher off at the airport, and when they get to New York, Reacher gets a suit that fits and heads to a police station to meet Professor Castillo. She's asked the police to protect her until Reacher arrives. Castillo tells Reacher that Joe was discussing mass undetectable counterfeiting with her. He discovered that someone had figured out how to create near-perfect $100 bills, and they were being made somewhere in Atlanta. Reacher realizes he had the operation all wrong. The Kleiners weren't shipping counterfeit money in. They were using the Atlanta facility to ship it out to Venezuela. After a chat with Officer Diaz about protecting Castillo, Reacher figures out he's been followed. He leads the tail into an alleyway and kills the man on a fire escape. At Officer Stevenson's house, he's getting ready for bed with his wife Emma, talking about what's going on at the station. As they turn out the lights, a truck pulls up, and 4 guys in white suits get out. Reacher's plane lands in Atlanta, and he spots a guy with a wheeled suitcase. It triggers a memory from when his family was moving to Germany. His mom tells him and Joe some things that might not make sense now, but they will later. She tells Joe that he can't fix everything in the world, but fixing some things is enough. To Reacher, she says he has the strength of 3 boys his size, but it's up to him to decide what to do with that strength. She tells him he'll do what's right. Finlay picks up Reacher, and Reacher tells him counterfeiting is all about the paper, and Joe thought he had the source for it locked down. Reacher wants to get the Bentley, but Finlay says they have to stop first. They head to a funeral for Mr. Kleiner, and while they're there, Dawson threatens Finlay before leaving. When they get to the auto shop to pick up the Bentley, Finlay gets a call and he looks stunned. He tells Reacher they'll head there right away. They get to Officer Stevenson's house, only to find it's a crime scene. Stevenson and his wife have been tortured and killed. Finlay says this answers their question about whether Stevenson was involved, but Reacher disagrees. He says the murder of Chief Morrison was to send a message, but this one is different. Stevenson was forced to watch his wife's torture, which Reacher thinks was to get info out of him. They think the killers thought Stevenson was working with Finlay and Reacher, so they wanted him to spill what he knew. Teal shows up, fires Finlay, and tells Reacher to get away from the crime scene. Finlay tells Reacher he needs to go to Tupelo to break the news to Stevenson's parents, but Reacher says he's going to have lunch with Officer Baker. At the diner, Reacher convinces Baker that he doesn't think Baker is involved in the killings, but he thinks Finlay is dirty. He tells Baker he's planning to break into the Hubble's house that night to look for any evidence. Baker buys it and says if Reacher finds anything, bring it to him. Reacher stops at a sporting goods store, grabs camouflage clothes, a knife, and a blackjack, then heads to the Hubbles. He puts on the gear and smears his face with dark green makeup. While hiding outside, Dawson and 4 other guys in white suits show up and break into the house. Reacher takes out the truck driver. Inside, 2 of Dawson's guys notice the truck's headlights flashing. One goes to check it out, and Reacher kills him, dumping the body in the truck bed. Then he sneaks back into the house and takes out another guy quietly. He finds another one of Dawson's men and kills him too. Dawson notices and shoots at Reacher, but Reacher uses the dead guy's body as a shield while Dawson empties his gun into him. Reacher and Dawson fight, and Dawson hits Reacher with a crowbar. They move outside, and Dawson knocks Reacher into the pool. But Reacher grabs his gun, shoots Dawson several times, and makes sure he's dead. Reacher gathers up all the weapons and tosses them into the Bentley's trunk. Exhausted, he strips off his clothes and takes a shower. While getting dressed, he spots the paper with his brother's clues, but the writing has faded from getting wet. This gives him an idea about how the counterfeiters got their paper. He calls Roscoe to update her and explains his theory. Reacher figures that the counterfeiters are using $1 bills, bleaching them, and then turning them into $100 bills, which are shipped to Venezuela to be used. Roscoe's excited, but reminds him they need solid proof before going to the feds. Since Joe had mentioned Jobling's garage, Reacher decides to check it out. After hanging up, Picard asks Roscoe if everything's okay, and she says she thinks Reacher's cracked the case. Meanwhile, Finley's just told Officer Stevenson's parents about their son's death and is back at his motel when Reacher calls with an update. While they're talking, Finley spots 3 hitmen he recognizes walk into the motel office. Reacher tells him how to escape by busting through the wall into the next room and climbing out the window. Finley manages to get in his car and speed off, but not before shooting out the tires of the hitman's car. Reacher and Finley arrive at the Jobling's house, only to find it's been completely destroyed in a fire. A neighbor says Jobling's wife, Judy, left a few days ago. Reacher remembers that Judy never changed her last name. He checks Joe's notes and sees that he wrote Jobling's garage with the plural possessive form. Reacher realizes they need to go to the parents' house, where two Joblings lived. They get to the parents' house and head to the garage, where they find several Kleiner air conditioning boxes filled with freshly printed $100 bills. They think they've cracked the case and make plans to take the counterfeit bills to Picard and hand the investigation over to the feds. On the drive to the safe house, Neagley calls Reacher to tell him that she got a description of the hitman who killed the EPA agent, and it matches a dead FBI agent, who just so happened to be Agent Picard's partner. When Reacher enters the safe house, he's met by 3 guns aimed at him. One by Teal, one by KJ Kleiner, and one by Agent Picard. Reacher tells Neagley that he has to leave. Teal, KJ, and Picard have Reacher and Finley at gunpoint. They show a video with Roscoe telling Reacher that if he doesn't do what they want, they'll torture and kill her, Charlie, and the kids like they did with Morrison. Reacher refuses, saying that Roscoe and Charlie know too much, so they'll be killed anyway. KJ insists that Charlie will be easy to control after they watch them kill Paul Hubble in front of them. KJ brags about his role in the operation and admits he killed his father and Joe. Reacher figures out that Dawson kicked Joe's body around while Morrison hit it. KJ says they need Reacher to find Paul Hubble, who's a loose end. They know Reacher's a tracker and want him to help Picard find Hubble. Reacher has until the next morning to find Hubble, or else the girls and kids will be killed. Reacher and Picard drive off in the Bentley, and Reacher convinces Picard that he needs a map and some time to think. They stop at the Margrave Diner, where Reacher figures out Paul's in Augusta. When the waitress brings him pie and coffee, Reacher spills the coffee on purpose, and while Picard is distracted, he grabs a fork. They head out to the car, and Reacher sticks the fork into the rear tire. Back at the police station, Finley's been handcuffed, beaten, and thrown into a holding cell by Officer Baker. The fork does its job, and the tire goes flat. Reacher and Picard go out to change it, but when Reacher pops the trunk, he grabs one of the guns he took from Dawson's crew and shoots at Picard. Reacher tricks Picard into showing himself and shoots him. Leaving Picard to die by the road, Reacher drives off to find Hubble. When Reacher finds him, he tells Hubble that his family's being held hostage until he's found. Reacher's sure they won't release Hubble's family now that he's been found, so Hubble has to do everything Reacher says to save them. Reacher drives to Hubble's house to get Dawson's truck, planning to use it to rescue Finley and attack the Kleiner warehouse. Finlay's still being guarded by Baker, and when Reacher texts Finlay's phone to duck and cover, Baker's too slow to react. Reacher crashes the truck through the front entrance of the police station, fatally injuring Baker by pinning him against the holding cell. After Finley's freed, Hubble shows up, and they grab weapons and ammo from the police locker. Neagley arrives too, figuring Reacher needed help after their last phone call. They leave the police station and head to the barber shop, knowing Mosley will be sympathetic. While Mosley makes coffee, Hubble draws up a layout of the warehouse where the girls and kids are held. The group heads over to the warehouse, finding several guards outside. Reacher believes there are more inside, and he thinks they're scared he'll break in with heavy firepower. Neagley is assigned to take out the outside guards. Inside the warehouse, Teal tells one of the guards to move the kids to an elevated office, leaving Charlie and Roscoe behind to worry about them. Roscoe tells Charlie to stay hopeful, believing that Reacher will rescue them. Neagley takes out 2 outside guards, and Reacher deals with the last one. Then he pours gasoline under one of the roll-up doors, and Finlay sets it on fire.